All right, so this is June 20th, 2018. This is the steering committee meeting. We're still not quite sure if we have quorum yet, but we figured we'd start the recording, and as we chatter, in case anything gets decided. Oh, with Clayton here, I think we may actually have quorum. So let's see the agenda. Does somebody want to sign up to be bosun for this meeting? I did it last time. I'm happy to take notes, but if other folks want to sign up.
I can be bosun because I put the topics in the agenda.
All right, Tim. All right, and then the topic that we were starting to talk about was getting things done. And I was saying that we need to find ways to do more things async because it's, people's schedules get busy.
So we originally had a sprint planning, or we had sprints with a backlog. And I know that Jace was supposed to curate our backlog for us, but I don't know where that left off. And I don't know if we can sign up for sprints or if we should have a forcing function for us to get together and knock out pieces of the backlog. I know we talked about it during our brief get together at KubeCon in Austin, I think it was. But we've never actually decided to do that.
I am pinging Jace right now because I haven't heard an update on that. I did give him permissions to do it on the repo, so my suspicion is he has, and it may be in the bowels of my email somewhere, busily being ignored. So I'm checking with him now.
I mean, one of the things we can do is we can take this time. We got most of an hour left here. We can make this a little bit of a working session, like on that whole thing of getting the office hours up and running. Like I can schedule the meeting, like you can write the 2 paragraphs, Sarah. We can it'll probably take us 20 minutes to get that done, but at least it'll be done.
Yeah, but it's a crappy use of everybody else's time, so I vote we don't do that.
Okay, I'm just throwing it out there.
Thanks.
So as part of the backlog that we discussed that we were going to do, which relates to that original topic, was that we said we were going to review some of the charters and find commonality and update the original proposal that Phil had written, but I don't know where that stands. Have people actually had the time to review some of the charters and to find the common sections that we want to put into the template?
I've read a bunch of charters, but I wasn't really looking for commonality.
Do we have a bearings on how many charters are outstanding and what the backlog is?
So I know Node is still outstanding. I think when we last talked, Tim, I think Brian had suggested picking 3 and just as a group reviewing it for commonalities. It's fine if we get that for our next meeting, and I'd volunteer Node to be one of those 3.
Should we just put a small group together to make that happen?
Yeah. Matt just sent an email for SIG apps too, so that could be one.
So who wants to sign up to be part of this group to try and get commonality?
I can do that.
I'm happy to read and review it.
Same here.
Having a forcing function helps so much.
Yeah, I like to work with Phil.
So who's on the hook here to actually drive this? Is going to be Tim, Phil, and Derek.
Sounds good to me.
Yep. So by next meeting, we're going to come armed with, as an action item, or by next meeting, we should come armed with, like, here's the common sections we should make as a PR to the original template. Is that the plan?
Okay. That sounds all right.
Okay.
All right, Tim Sinclair, are you going to be involved in that too?
Yeah. Do you want me to schedule a meeting for all of us?
Sure. I can be involved. I know I'm supposed to review some charters anyway, so I think being involved in this conversation is worthwhile. I actually, with 111 freeing up, I am signing myself up for more things, but yeah.
Okay. So one way of doing this is decide on 3 or 4 charters, send the charters out, everyone can review them if they want and read them, then come to a meeting and review together and discuss.
Sounds good.
All right.
All right, that seems like a plan. And then by next week, we can make a PR, and then we can maybe we can start to divvy up the backlog of outstanding charters, because I don't think it's fair to those who have put the effort in for us to keep on talking about this and not try to do our level best to get that done, right?
Yeah, I can say that I have not done as much as I need to here, so I've been falling down on the job.
Yeah. Are there any other meta points on this one that we want to discuss? One? Nope. Okay. Next one is a topic that I wanted to bring up to the steering committee because I think it's important. Because I've done a lot of work helping SIG docs this 111 cycle, and there's a bunch of really bad artifacts that exist inside our documentation. And the question I wanted to raise to this group was, should we help to outline a global policy across the project with regards to ownership, maintenance, and rules around docs? So with regards to ownership, we have a bunch of stale docs that the docs folks don't know what to do with, and they're kind of just taking up space, and they lead to confusion. Are there any comments there?
What was the item you were thinking about us taking on?
Is to help define a policy for or at least help to define the structure for the docs folks to define a policy for what it means to be in Kubernetes docs, right? The maintenance lifecycle of those things, because they're very confused by some of it, and some of it are broader beyond the scope of what the docs folks understand. Like, should we be documenting alpha features in the main documentation website? If so, what are the clauses we should be specifying inside of the alpha features, right? Who should the docs folks poke if the lifecycle maintenance of a doc goes out of scope and no one really owns it anymore? We have a ton of cruft. Ever since the beginning, we even have documentation that's gone back since I think almost the 1.0 release.
So I don't think it's unreasonable to say, hey, if we can't find an owner for some docs, we just move them to an attic, or we leave them in GitHub in some place that doesn't get published on the site or something like that. There should be some due diligence around it, but it doesn't seem crazy to try and say, hey, by default, if there's no owner, get rid of it. Sarah?
So I'm actually going to vote that this is one of those things that SIGDocs should figure out. This is so not a steering committee. If we want to delegate things out, this is totally in their space. They can run by their proposal.
The problem is enforcing ownership rights is totally in our space, right?
Well, I mean, maybe they come up with a proposal and then we rubber stamp it.
But what does that do to enforce? I mean, this is a real problem. How do we enforce it?
Exactly. I realize the docs folks are asking for clarification.
How do we enforce what? That people update their docs, or that they can kick out docs that are invalid?
Yes. Both. Well, both technically.
I mean, if on the one hand, I agree with Sarah. If SIGDocs feels this is a problem, bring us a proposal. We will say we agree with it. We grant you the authority to delete docs if you feel that they're stale. But that's a really bad outcome. How do we incentivize and enforce that people keep docs up to date?
Well, I mean, one thing we could do is we could say, hey, docs folks, it's okay to actually point people at the appropriate Slack channel, and then, PRs accepted / bug those folks so that they stop getting bugged, right? I mean, I don't know if that's a good idea or not. So there's two problems. So one of them is how do we actually encourage people to write and update docs for the right things? And then how do we, who has permission to kick out docs that are unmaintained or they can't find owners?
This isn't just about docs, I think, right? This is a general, you're not doing what you need to do to release the feature, right? And it could tests have the same thing where if you don't write tests good enough, or like not filing feature requests or having whatever you need to do for the release.
It's symptomatic of a broader problem for lifecycle management of a feature.
Well, so I mean, here's the thing: is that if a feature is not documented, it won't be used well. It'll probably rot. It'll be, we could also say that something's not like. I mean, what are the sticks that we have? I guess so. One of the sticks that we have is conformance. Another stick that we have is that people actually use your thing, and docs can be one way to do that. One of the things we can't do is like remove features if they're not documented, because people will continue to rely on those. Same thing, we can't remove features if they're not tested, even though that would be the
we can prevent people from adding new features or modifying those.
What does a SIG chair or technical lead mean if they're not maintaining some of the aspects of these things too, right? Like part of the lifecycle management responsibility should be in their charter. So as we start to talk about charters, and as we start to talk about, what does it mean to add a feature and be a chair of a SIG? You should be managing the lifecycle of the features that you're responsible for that SIG.
Is the problem that folks are unaware of what work needs to be done, or is it that they're aware and just not prioritizing it?
I think unaware of the state right now. I don't think there's a feedback loop between docs and maybe some of the SIG leads. I think we took a proactive measure to say, like, we're going to train wreck all the docs for SIG cluster lifecycle and actually try to manage all of them. And what we found was a state of affairs that we didn't expect.
That's not surprising to me. I've argued for a very long time that the fact that we allow code check-ins without docs people approving them is a problem. Like, not to get all draconian on this, but like, can we put docs people in the loop on every PR?
That seems like too much of a blocker. Right? Like they can't keep up with.
I have never seen anything that works except putting people in the way.
Well, I mean, one of the levers that we have, and this is going to be something through SIG architecture, is the API review process, and this idea of and the feature gate process. So we could say that docs folks have to be in the loop if you're going to turn a feature on by default. They have to be in the loop if you're going to promote an API to beta, and like you just can't do it if you don't have the docs in place.
Yeah, I think the promotion.
So do we? I'm sorry, Tim. Do we have a clear association of a doc owner with a SIG? Like when you say like include the docs folks, like it's not like it's not like they're sitting in on every SIG meeting or anything.
No, what I mean is nominate some process through SIG docs or whomever, whether that's individual people or some group thing or whatever, that says your PR is not going to get merged until you have a corresponding docs PR in the pipeline. And we don't require that today, and therefore it doesn't get done.
Or maybe the right point in time is the KEP, right? Instead of like start with the documentation and then only even consider code once the documentation exists.
I think that's a little bit backwards because oftentimes you create a proposal and what you actually write in code could drift. And I think maybe before, I like Tim's idea of blocking the actual feature promotion or the actual larger PR merge until docs are in place. Seems reasonable, but I don't know how you enforce that.
Is it sufficient to say it's just APIs? I'm trying to come up with a counterexample where
anything that's in feature gates that's AFLA, right? Like there's a ton of features that are not API specific that are in the feature gates list, like IPv6, and any of the other ones. You can just walk through the listing there.
Okay.
But before they get promoted to like a beta level, to have some level of documentation around it. But then there's go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm just concerned that is still not comprehensive enough. Like flags to kubelets or config params or behavioral changes. Like I'm not sure how to characterize them, but maybe starting somewhere is better than nothing.
Well, I would say that flags are part of our API surface area, and adding or removing new flags should probably go through the API review process also.
So what does even docs mean? Like, are we talking like we ought to generate docs for APIs and we ought to generate docs for flags, right? Like, is that sufficient? Or do you need
It's like how do you use the feature, right? Because I think what we see is that there'll be something like, there's a new security feature that involved a bunch of changes into the kubelet and into the API server, and you have to set like 3 different parameters in the right way to be able to use this, and those things are fundamentally undocumented in terms of like each of the individual flags, but like how you use those together to actually achieve something ends up being undocumented.
Right, so there's like, I guess I just mean like, there's a quality bar aspect here, which like the docs, maybe the SIG docs is responsible for reviewing. There's a notion of like tutorials versus conceptual documentation versus task documentation, right? Like, I guess the SIG docs would actually need to come up with some sort of metric about whether deciding something's sufficiently documented.
Yeah, well, I think actually having SIG docs define the rubric may be okay if we feel like they feel like they have enough bandwidth to actually be able to do that.
I don't know if they're going to have enough bandwidth. They might in the beginning of 112 to help this is a big problem for them. Like they would love for this to go away, or to have some resolution that could help it be solved over time.
So to the original question, I think we should push back and say, give us a proposal of what you think you want to do when docs fall out of favor, and we will endorse your proposal as long as it's reasonable. There's a second question of, what can we do to make sure that docs stop rotting?
I think part of the charter process should be like what docs are responsible for, because we call out what code you're responsible for, but we should also say like, these are the docs you're responsible for as chairs or leads of the SIG.
That's still not going to force people to update things.
Yeah, I mean, we need a signal first, I think, which we don't have. Like, and then I think we need, like, I guess the question I have is like, if the SIGs had a dashboard, for instance, and there was like a little like green, yellow, red dot next to every doc they owned, like would they naturally just fix the docs on their own?
Well, I think part of the release process could be to, you know, if we had automation or some way, shape, or form, could be part of the life cycle for release is to make sure that all of the owner things that are checked off in the charter for a given SIG actually have been updated appropriately, and part of the release manager's job would be to wrangle that SIG chair.
So okay, so I think, you know, there's some problems that mirror problems that we have across the code base in general. Right now, code is owned by people, not by SIGs, which means that we actually don't know who is that longitudinal, you know, like we have a mix there, right? Because like sigs.yaml actually specifies who owns what code based on a SIG basis, but the owners file generally right now only specifies people. And I think it's even worse in docs, because the doc stuff, like you can look at the history of who's modified this doc and try and intuit which SIG that belongs to, but there is no way to say which SIG owns which doc across the entire docs repo. So maybe that's at least a place to start.
I started with alias references for SIG cluster lifecycle for the docs. We started doing that, and I plan on pushing the rest of that through for 112. But I think we could possibly poke other SIGs to at least get the owner's reference and the aliases in place. But this is, like you mentioned, this is meta. It hits everything.
Yeah, I think I still worry about the fact that, like, at the end of the day, we're a volunteer army, and so our sticks are limited here.
Well, the stick we have is people want to get things committed to our project. For whatever reason, they keep sending us pull requests. And the only stick we've really got is no. And, you know, I got to give props where they're due. Like when I submit a change to Docker or something, I go and I update the docs, because they're going to have their docs people sign off on every damn pull request.
So one of the problems, Tim, you brought up was the rotting of docs. Like, does this, I guess this would address that by when the feature is changed, it would cause a update to the doc that owns it or something like that?
Well, there'd be well-defined responsible parties where the docs folks can like go poke to understand like, can we get rid of this, right, as part of the release process. And part of like any release would be like, hey, chair, you need to make sure that you update the docs. Or do these things still apply? Yes or no?
I see. So they're just, the main thing they're looking for now is ownership for them to
I think ownership, clearly define ownership, and a person to poke for every cycle.
But I don't understand. Like, is the release owner going to poke every SIG every cycle? And is every SIG expected to review every doc every cycle?
That's what commercial projects do, right? Like, I mean, every commercial project I've ever worked on does that. I mean, the other stick we have is hold up a release, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we need to get in a place too where we can have owners of areas of the project commit changes to a release and not hold up the release for everyone because one particular owner didn't do one particular thing.
I think, you know, okay, so we're talking, so we've had 4 proposals so far. Do it at kept time, which I think is super early, right? It's before code is written. Do it on every check-in, which is what Tim was suggesting. Do it when features get promoted during like API review / feature gates, or do it on release. I'm worried that do it on release is too late because that hits the thing that Phil's talking about, which is people checking a bunch of code, and then all of a sudden we're waiting for them the right docs, and then those folks have held up the entire cycle, right? So,
and worse, we've let go of the only stick that we have, which is saying no in the first place.
Right. I mean, well, technically we could go and actually rip the code out at that point to get the release out, but like that's real work.
It's not what we want.
And nor is it actually likely to be successful more often.
I know, I was going to say, it's real work, right? There's risk in terms of like untangling and ripping code out. So it seems to me that the API review / feature promotion, like we need to take seriously about having a checklist when things move to beta, when we add new things like flags. And we have to have a chokehold on that, where that stuff, like, you know, it can't just be a SIG YOLOing stuff in. We gotta get some set of process around that at this point. That's kind of what I'm feeling.
I agree.
So that means the docs is the bar like someone from SIG docs reviews the documentation changes along with the code changes and then determines whether or not they're correct and sufficient?
Can we nominate membership within the SIG to at least say as they'll serve as like responsible stewards to act that the docs were written so we don't overburden SIG docs? Like, I assume there's far more people outside of docs, and if that means like we just define a sub role or of some kind that says this person can okay that, yeah, I agree the doc here is sufficient, that should be fine. And I'm not sure, like, I wouldn't want every PR to say like, is doc input needed or not, but it seems like at least reviewers should have the way of saying docs required or not.
That could be a responsibility of the chair or the chairs. Or you could have a separate role.
My fear is that people are lazy and that we already have the option, like any PR that comes through, any reviewer could say, hey man, this needs some docs. But because it's not there in your face, it tends to get forgotten. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody, probably more, in that I review too many PRs too quickly. I think the only way that we have this succeed is if it's a required component. Now, maybe it's not every PR. Maybe it's PRs that touch feature gates and PRs that touch flags / configs and PRs that touch APIs, and that's it. And hopefully that's not the preponderance of PRs, but I don't really know.
I think
Yeah.
that's fine. Or even if it's just a conscious action to say docs not required, but by default docs are required. And then hopefully, Tim, that would be enough of a conscious reminder on your part. And we would trust reviewers to do the right thing first rather than be as disruptive as requiring.
How happy are we with release notes?
It's better than nothing.
Approved.
According to the docs people, because I've been sitting on SIG release and SIG docs to try and get pieces of this done this
God
cycle.
bless you.
And one of the issues is that there's a bunch of the people who are managing the release notes have reached out to a bunch of people and they have not responded. So
I guess, Tim, I'd rather like move the pendulum a little rather than move the pendulum a lot and see how it goes. Because I could imagine this being like, I don't know, not well liked when first rolled out.
yeah, I don't want to be draconian. I want to be incentivized to do the right thing.
I do think we need to cut down
Phil's been
each
trying for
doc.
like 10 minutes.
So like, it would not cost us much to just put in another tag or label in a specific docs LGTM, right? Like that's pretty low cost. And like, I don't know if it's going to get people to do it or not, but like, it means someone said that they reviewed that and hopefully feels responsible for having looked at the docs.
You could also have like I don't know about docs LGTM, but like the release note required flag or label is pretty sufficient for people to stop and make sure that, and notes to the reviewer that like, no, we should really have a release note here. So you could do something very similar with like a separate docs section that says link to docs.
So the difference here in my mind is that release note required is like, oh, great, I'll fix that. It'll take me 2 minutes, right? Writing docs is like, oh, I'll get to that next week. Let's get this in. And then, you know, people will promise it and then it won't happen and the release will
Yeah,
happen.
I think we need a cultural change that's not okay anymore.
Right. I mean, we need to get people to believe that it's important to write this stuff.
Okay, so I think like the stick we have is like we need to get to the point where we have that API review process, we have a checklist, and I think adding docs to that makes a ton of sense.
But not every change that we're talking about is going to go through the API review
Okay,
process.
we're not going to get everything, right? We're not going to get everything, but I think things will improve dramatically if any major new features require some sort of docs.
I mean, I actually sort of, from this conversation, I sort of like the idea of leaning on it the way we do release notes. If it came up and said you need to put a you need to put a docs section in your PR comment, and you have to say docs not applicable, or you have to say docs, here's a PR link, and the bot won't let you merge until that's been acknowledged, then at least you put it in people's face, and then maybe we empower SIG docs to say, hey, as the stewards of the docs, tell us what you need to make them better. And if you feel like you need to inject yourself on more PRs, then let's figure out what the heuristic is for figuring that out.
Yeah, like there's two things people need, right? Like guidance and motivation, right? And if we're just talking about like the stick, like the beatings will continue until morale improves, right? Sort of like it's not going to help unless we also have the guidance there. And if we just give guidance, maybe like we at least move, like Derek or Tim was saying, we move the pendulum.
I do like the automation because it's just a simple forcing function as part of every PR, and the key reviewers will see it, right? They'll denote like, no, we should really update the docs here. So it then falls into the responsibility of the approvers and reviewers.
I don't know. I mean, like it's better than nothing, but I really suspect that it ends with, it's just like security warning fatigue. I think it'll be like docs, fatigue, and people will just be like, oh, it's this thing that I have to do to make this thing go away so I can check in. Like, I agree that we need to have a cultural change here. I'm just afraid that this isn't enough to actually sort of ignite that.
I mean, the other alternative is we push it on to reviewers, and instead of just saying LGTM, you have to say code LGTM, docs LGTM, rel node LGTM, And, you know, I don't know about you guys, but I have canned GitHub replies and I have to think about which one I'm going to use. And this forces me to think even harder about which one I'm going to use. And before I say release note LGTM, I'm going to stop and think, did I read the release note? Because I'll be honest, sometimes I LGTM and approve PRs, and then later I go, oh, that probably did need a release note, didn't it?
You put LGTM on the release note, and then
I put I just have my canned response, LGTM.
All right, so
read it and good. Sometimes I don't even read the release note. And I feel bad about that. I should feel bad about that.
But sometimes you do.
Sometimes I do,
right?
But not always. But
So
if my canned response was LGTM approved, release note approved, docs approved, I would sure be thinking, if this flops, it's going to come right back on me as the person who approved it.
So one of the things that I think is interesting is that we've already seen a need in some of our automation to have different types of LGTM. And so what you see is that there's the docs folks in their repo, they wanted to repurpose approved to actually mean sort of like, I think, editorial LGTM versus technical LGTM. So it may make sense for us to say that, like, for any PR, you know, on a, you know, per repo basis, there's a set of LGTMs that need to be specified, and all of those have to be met for the thing to go on. Because then, you know, but then are we going to end up with like 8 LGTMs that you have to do?
Maybe.
If there's
Is
eight,
that
if
bad?
there's
I
eight
don't
things
know.
you can check, potentially.
Is that a bad thing?
I don't know.
I mean, again, just to draw on Docker, they have a life cycle wherein, like, technical people don't even look at it until the docs have been touched.
Like the code.
That would make me feel less
maybe I
bad,
can
Sam.
feel
I kind of actually like that idea on just a human level. Why am I so slow to get to your PR? Well, you didn't write your docs yet. So I could see why that's appealing to you, Tim, given probably the surface area you have to touch.
I mean, in some sense, it's like NASA launch control, right? Like, tests okay, docs okay, release notes okay. All right, let's get the code in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, so one SIG that'll be impacted by this quite heavily, I believe, is API machinery, because there's a lot of work that's going on in terms of refactoring and everything that around that, especially as, like, if we say, hey, these docs include docs around client Go. I'm not sure this is a bad thing, but I'm just like, this will hit some SIGs more than others.
I mean, it'll hit any SIG who's doing a high volume of PRs. They happen to be the doing a bunch of really energetic work right now. And I suspect that 99% of their work doesn't require docs changes or release notes, but some of it will, and forcing them to stop and think about it might not be so bad.
In like the client Go stuff, like if that's just done in GoDoc, then, you know, that should be reviewed as part of the PR anyway.
I mean, yeah, maybe that's good enough. Well, I mean, part of the problem with client Go is that there's like, they don't have an upgrade guide for, like, how do you move from one version of client Go to another. So it's like you update and you're like, I don't know, a bunch of stuff broke and I have to, like, go spelunking to figure out what changed.
All right. So in terms of time box, what can we do for next steps here?
Tim St. Clair, do you want to maybe point? I'll get the video up, you know, today or tomorrow. Do you want to maybe point the docs folks at this and have them have some input into this, and we can start an async conversation around that?
That seems reasonable.
I think the first message is that they are empowered to demand more of us.
Yeah, and I don't know about policy and policy enforcement and how much they will have, insight into that versus how much we can think about that as a broader group, right?
If they can describe what they want in terms of behavior, we can come up with mechanisms, right?
Sure. If they, I don't necessarily know if the docs folks are the group that will help to define some of the policy mechanics behind it, right?
I mean, we can work with them around that. I think this is at least the conversation that we had here is a little bit of a primer of some of the options that we're thinking about here. There may be stuff we're not considering. Yeah. There may be stupid, simple things that can happen sooner that we're not seeing.
Yeah, if we're talking about changing the culture of our project, I think it's going to be something we iterate on.
Yeah,
and have a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, I can work with the docs folks because I've been intimately involved with this last release cycle. So,
And I think, I mean, it
Sure.
doesn't have to be you driving all this, Tim. I think, it's just point them at this, and then hopefully we can get the office hours things going on for the steering committee, and then this would be very much a type of thing that would be great to handle there.
I'm all in favor of draconian where draconian works, and I feel like this is a place where non-draconian does not work. So let's try the other way. But I don't want
in favor of draconian, but I don't think we need I think we have need to actually tighten up the API and other sort of user interface choke points too. So, but I think
the API stuff will happen, and I think there was a doc that Jace had started on API proposal.
It's not either or. We can do both.
Yeah, I think we need to do both. I don't want to impose anything on SIG docs because I know that staffing up SIG docs is not going to be the easiest thing in the world. But I want them to feel empowered and to own the documentation. And if they feel like we're doing a poor job of keeping documentation up to date, and it sounds like we are, I mean, I know we are, but it sounds like they also feel that way, then I want them to step up and demand more from us.
Well, I think it's more than just keeping the docs up to date. I think the fact is that we have a lot of docs. Some of them are out of date. Some of them aren't. They're not necessarily the right docs that we need for certain scenarios. And so, I mean, is that your impression, Tim, as you went through this exercise with cluster lifecycle?
yes, there are a number of issues. We've only touched on a couple of them, right?
So contributors to our project fall into categories where there's individuals looking to get stuff done, and then there's companies. When companies are looking to get stuff done, they actually can bring other resources to bear. Do we want to, I think there's this natural thing that if hey, if we're trying to make doc changes and we have Jennifer who's been involved a lot, say in SIG docs, naturally, she'll gravitate to helping out, review docs for things that, Heptio's been working on. Is there a stick around that we can use to actually help have companies get more people involved in something like SIG docs?
So there's the not making it any worse, and then there's the making it better. All the proposals so far have really been about not making it any worse, right? No more PRs, no more changes without docs. How do we incentivize and actuate real material docs changes is a different question.
Well, no, but I think part of it is that look, if we actually get more docs going in, we get more docs changed and reviewed because actually this is wildly successful, all of a sudden, is there a problem where the docs team is then, the SIG docs folks are overloaded?
Oh, I expect so.
They're already overloaded, but do we make that problem worse? What are the levers that we have, and this is a different topic, to incentivize people to get involved in that part of the project, whether it be individuals or companies having folks?
Well, wouldn't that be a wonderful problem? I mean, that we had so many new docs and changes to docs coming through that the SIG docs team said, oh my God, we can't deal with it. I would love to make that problem and then find a way to go and beat the deep-pocketed companies into donating more tech pubs people.
All right. Well, I mean, we'll let the SIG docs folks comment on where on the 0 to full capacity they are currently.
Who is the SIG docs chair?
Tim,
do you know?
It's escaping. I have to take a look here of who I was talking with. I know Misty was running the 1.11 release, but
so Zach, Andrew, and Jared are the chairs.
Zach Andrew was the one I was talking to.
Jared Body?
Yeah, I'm certain.
Okay.
And Zach's working for the LF directly. Andrew and Jared are with Google.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's throw this back to the SIG docs people, but maybe I'll swing by Andrew's desk this afternoon and just relay some of these thoughts to him and tell him I want him to ask for more.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think with the formation of the SIG cloud provider, that's a very specific focused area where there's a tremendous amount of rot, and I'm working with I'm working with the newly formed SIG leads to try and address these issues because it's clear that there was no owner. So it was kind of like ad hoc volunteer people publishing pieces of it, but there is no concise documentation for best practices. And I'm currently working with those folks to try and at least get it in a healthy place for 112.
All right.
Any other
Anything
topics
else?
that are left? Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying, do we have anything else in the last?
Same thing.
I had one, but private.
Should we
Okay.
start recording?
Yeah. All right. So with that, we're going to stop the recording here, and you know, really looking forward to engage with the SIGDoc folks about that stuff that we talked about for the last half an hour, 45 minutes. Hopefully, y'all weren't yelling at the screen as we were talking about it, but yeah, because I definitely know there will be folks watching the recording. So, all right.
Thanks.